Well, good afternoon. I hope you've had a great conference so far. And my name is John Follis, and I'm with Harvest Innovative Solutions. And as you can see here, is that our focus really is integrating revolutionary products and proven technology to provide unique solutions to everyday problems. Our focus as a company has really been on roofing, on energy control, particularly using window tinting. But our focus for today's conversation is going to be air quality. A little bit about myself is that prior to getting into the facilities world, I was actually a litigator. And many people ask me, how in the world did I go from litigation to window tinting to roofing to indoor air quality? And frankly, I oftentimes ask myself that same question. But in reality, there is some logic behind this progression. While as an attorney, my primary role was to defend companies in lawsuits involving personal injuries, a big part of that is risk management and understanding the needs of my clients and to assist them in developing policies and procedures that were going to help them to avoid lawsuits, or alternatively, when a lawsuit occurred, that they were prepared to provide me with as much information as possible so that I could provide them with the best defense possible. So a lot of my mindset turned into be revolving around risk management. And so when I got out of law, that was my focus, but that was on the injury side of things. And as time went on, I then started to evolve into the facility side of things, which involves really protection and risk management associated with the building as opposed to associated with individuals. And as time went on, I would listen to my customers and try to identify other things that they could possibly be doing to improve their situation. Oftentimes, you don't have the time to look in detail to such things, and therefore continue to do things that you've always done. So a big part of my focus became taking your everyday situations and seeing if we could come up with a unique approach to dealing with those challenges. And so in that regard, one of the things that I've found is a system that does an amazing job in controlling your air quality. It kills mold, mildew, viruses, and bacteria 24/7, 365. It does it automatically. It does it continuously. It does it safely. And it does it effectively. This last season has obviously been very unique, not just for school districts and building owners, but the world as a whole. And as long as this has been going on, we're still facing the challenge and the struggle of what to do to get back to normal. Whether it's bringing the kids back to school, whether it's allowing workers to come back to work, whether it's opening restaurants and hospitals and dealing with the challenges that the first responders have. It's a common challenge. We hear on the TV the gloom and doom and the effects that it has had on people in our society and in our world. And what I'm hopeful for is that today, part of what we're going to talk to you about is bringing a message of hope. I was just recently at a school conference with school superintendents, and they started talking a lot about this concept of social emotional learning. And with that, the focus was really on building a trust and confidence in the school arena. And what I believe that we're going to be able to talk about today is an approach to dealing with air quality, with controlling the viruses and the bacteria and the mold that is in our buildings, and really even get a focus on how to try to return to normalcy in this world of COVID. And with that, I'm hopeful that this actually is a message of hope, that you can bring back to your higher-ups or to your team and discuss that there is the opportunity to get back to normal. And normal may be a little different, but it can become more the normal than what we're dealing with right now. We're going to talk about technology that will improve the air quality. When I first introduced this technology to an engineer, his comment to me was, sounds like pixie dust. And I started thinking about the originator of pixie dust, and it just so happens that that same person also is just such an innovator, that his innovations really have led to so much progress. And so that's what we're here to talk about, that we can take concepts that seem to be pixie dust and really turn them into state-of-the-art that become the new norm for us. Take the cell phone, the iPhone. 10 or 12 years ago, it was pixie dust. And now look without it. We can't leave home without it. We can't do anything without it. And so as we talk about this, open your mind to the wonders of what technology can do that can allow us to get back to our normal. So we know that every day, building owners are challenged with controlling and improving indoor air quality. Just the building itself, over time, has these challenges. And then when you start bringing people into these buildings, it only increases the challenge. And so I'm sure that many of you are familiar with the reality of what we call sick building syndrome or tight building syndrome. But in addition to that, the tight, it's kind of the opposite. And when we look at these numbers, they're pretty astounding to see that our buildings and our schools have aged so much that has impacted the quality of the air. Oftentimes you can walk into an older building and you just can smell the must or the mold or just the imperfections that are there. Schools aren't the only ones that are facing with this challenge. Buildings all over are not immune to this situation. Those problems get exacerbated when we have challenges with controlling our roofs and the leaks in our roofs. I was astounded when I started in this industry and would jokingly ask people if they had roof leaks, and they would laugh. So roof leaks are an evil that exists, that are not just a nuisance, but they are contributors to our poor air quality. And as you can see here as an example, the older schools. You just look at those when you walk in, it wouldn't be unreasonable to expect that it was going to just have some different kind of smell, not that freshness. And then, of course, here we see the effects of the leaky roofs and the potential for mold. And then that mold can just get worse and worse to where it's really dangerous. And as a school superintendent or a person in charge of facilities or as a hospital owner or building owner, the last thing you want to know is that the news is out there because you have an infestation. So controlling that is critical. And when you're in many areas of Texas that have the high humidity and the moisture, it even becomes more of a challenge. While we'll have a lot of discussions about schools, these numbers apply across the board. But when we think about our schools, I never thought about a school being a germ candy store or a breeding ground for infections. But that's where they are. School is just starting. And even without the COVID situation, studies show and history show that there's a big increase in absenteeism in the beginning of the school year. when kids are introducing the germs into the buildings and they're introducing them to each other. And we see numbers such as 189 million lost days from school. The numbers are in the hundreds of millions of lost time from work, all due to illness, many of which arise because of the condition of our buildings and the people that we're exposed to on a daily basis inside those buildings. 5 to 20% of the population gets the flu, and it gets spread inside our buildings. And an average student misses 4.5 days of school per year. In addition to the impact that the age of our buildings have, we also have the focus and concerns about microorganisms that cultivate inside our buildings. And these numbers are astonishing, that in a 48-hour period, or even less, we can go from one little molecule to a billion. And again, the temperature and the humidity significantly impacts that. Here's just an example of how long many of these different viruses can stay on our surfaces and in our buildings. It's astounding. And if you see that in 18 hours you have that growth, what happens in 4 days or 10 days? It becomes a huge problem, which lead to the illnesses that we've talked about. Here's an example of what a school teacher did and just took some bread. The one on your left was the teacher just rubbed a Chromebook. And within a short period of time, look at what developed. And you can see when somebody with dirty hands picked up the piece of bread. And even when you use hand sanitizer, results. These are unseen, unknown problems, but we feel the effects of them. When was the last time many of these areas were ever cleaned? Even the water fountain, that I'm sure is cleaned frequently, you can still see the debris or the residue. A child's mat, a workplace keyboard. Look at the germs on the keyboard. A stethoscope for a doctor. A cart that gets rolled from room to room at a hospital. How often are these things cleaned and sanitized? And even when they are cleaned and sanitized, how long does that last for the next time somebody is in contact with it? Does it become recontaminated? It's a continuous problem. The average desk at a student has 400 times the amount of bacteria than a toilet seat. And then when you consider that a teacher has 20 times more bacteria on her desk or his desk than a student, they potentially have 8,000 times more bacteria than on a toilet seat. Who would have ever thought? Teacher absenteeism is high. We not only have our surface issues, but we have these airborne scenarios. And you can see where just normal breathing is going to expose people. And that's why we talk about the 6-foot rule. But how effective ultimately is that when somebody coughs? And then more significantly, when somebody sneezes. Can sneeze at upwards to 100 miles an hour. And those contaminants can travel over 20 feet. So even the 6 foot doesn't necessarily help us. Teachers have the highest level of asthma out of any profession, and students, 1 out of 10 kids, which significantly increases the likelihood of them getting the flu and being hospitalized as a result. So now let's get to the heart of what all of our focus is right now. I know that as you prepared for schools, you cleaned, you washed, you put down your symbols on how to walk, where to walk, wearing our masks. all of those things are being done so that we can try to control what's going on with COVID. And that's where I want to spend the rest of this time talking about. Most recently, July of this year, the United States Army, along with Auburn University, did a comprehensive study on the best practices to allow us to return to normal. They call it a multi-level approach to bringing us back to normal. And in that approach, they focus on engineering. They're focusing on the removal of the hazard, the replacing of the hazard, isolation from the hazard, changing the way we work, and the use of protective equipment. One of the most significant things that they concluded is that the COVID virus is airborne. It comes from the use of shared air, people being around each other, breathing, coughing, sneezing. What was also significant is that their focus turned from surface transmissions to the air. And as I've spoken to many facility owners and school people, the focus has been on cleaning surfaces, wiping down things, washing down our hands, which is a great thing and a practice for bacteria and virus generally. However, as it relates to COVID, we're seeing that the key is controlling what's in the air, because that's where this virus lives. So from an engineering standpoint, it's critical that there be a big focus on what we're doing with these buildings. To your right, and we'll talk a little bit more about it, is a hierarchy of controls, which is giving a focus on the most important things down to the least important things that we can collectively do to bring us back to our new normal. And one of the big focuses they talk about is innovative technology that revolve around keeping the air sanitized. That money spent today is going to pay dividends, not just today, but for a long, long time to come. It's causing us to have to reflect upon how we are ventilating our buildings and what engineering processes and steps we have in place to improve the flow of the air and the introduction of clean air. Essentially, they came up with these recommendations. And it wouldn't surprise me to know that you're focusing on some, if not on all, of these engineering recommendations. And you can see what they are. These are all best practices, things that we should be doing anyhow. But now with the focus of COVID, is a new direction of our thinking. But the next thing they talk about is the innovative technology. And that it's the innovative technology that's going to allow us to fight this war, beat the invisible army that has shut our world down. And even though we're focusing on the vaccine, the clean air technology is critical to what we're doing. So getting back to the hierarchy, we can talk about the elimination and what's being done. And traditionally, we're doing anything from using Clorox to UV lights in our AC systems to using different types of filtering systems and utilizing fogging machines. These are all good things to be doing, but they are not the solution to the COVID problem. We talked earlier that surface areas aren't as much of an issue. But even in the areas where it is an issue, in the list that I showed you before, many of those contaminants are surface related. We have to do more than just rely upon our custodial staff and a bottle of Clorox. If you can see the picture down at the lower left, you can make out a container of water. but you can't even see through it because the water's so dirty. I took that photo, watching those custodians, cleaning those tables with that. The UV lights, I know that that's something that's being looked into, and they're effective so long as the contaminant crosses over the light. You have to have that airflow going through if it's in your duct system, and it works good in the duct system. But what happens when that person sneezes or coughs, and it's in that air for 45 minutes? It's too late. Same with the filtering systems. They're effective and they're helpful. I've heard that even this COVID can get through these ventilating systems. How effective is it even there? And the foggers. The foggers are good. However, people can't be in the room. And once the smoke clears, everything is sanitized. And yet when people are introduced back into the building, look what happens. Recontamination. So the technology we're going to talk about, I'd like to see being made as standard as a sprinkler system. I talked to a school superintendent, made that statement to him, and he said, well, you know something, in 35 years, I've never had to use it. But every day, I have to worry about contamination in my buildings. So the system we're going to talk about, and the system that is mentioned in this report, is the utilization of low levels of hydrogen peroxide. And the utilization of this technology allows us to insert the equipment into the AC duct system. And it actually manufactures low levels of hydrogen peroxide. No humans are involved. No maintenance is required except changing out some of the cells after about 25,000 hours of usage, or about 3 years. And what this does is it actually produces it from the air, converts it into a negative or positive charge, and then it gets dispersed throughout a building through the ventilation system. It becomes airborne, and it is continuously in the air at very safe and low levels, but highly effective. It will kill viruses in the air, on surfaces, the mats that we showed earlier, the keypads that we looked at. It will attack and kill, providing us with rooms that are safe and healthy on a continuous basis. The significance about it being a positive and a negative is that that's what most germs and viruses are. And unlike the systems we talked about earlier, which are passive, it requires the contaminant to go to it. This hydrogen peroxide is actually drawn to the contaminant. So it actively seeks it, hunts it down, and penetrates that cell wall and kills that virus very, very quickly. So as I was saying earlier, is that what we have are buildings that historically, as they get older, have challenges. Even the new ones, we have tight buildings now, so we're not allowing enough fresh air to come in. So finding that balance, but being able to continuously keep the air quality at a very good level is critical. So what's the impact? What does it cost in particular a school? We know that the improvement of air quality improves performance and attendance. And with regards to attendance, when kids are at school, schools get paid. I have this a little bit backwards, sorry about that. But we also see studies that as you get into this virtual learning, the learning diminishes. So we have to get our students back in. And that's with the students that are on. We know that there are communities that are challenged with the technology, with the availability of internet and all these other things. But the grade here doesn't even show up because they don't even have the access to it. And I know that you guys are doing a wonderful job to do that and improve that. Teacher absenteeism is another factor. and costs associated with that. And I've been told, or I've read that under the DOE, that if we can keep our ventilating systems clean, A, we are not dispersing contaminated air back into the rooms, but we're also improving the efficiency of the way these systems work. It's my understanding that every 12 to 18 months they ought to be decontaminated. That's very costly, if it's even being done. A system like this will do this continuously and eliminate that need. So we can look at what the cost is to a district, but what's the cost to a taxpayer? Those of us that are paying for these public buildings. And what happens if a student has to stay home? And there happens to be just one person who's caring for those kids. And they have to stay home. And if they stay home, they don't get paid. And then they stay home and don't get paid, and then they have to spend money taking their kid to the doctor. And then what if that kid gets hospitalized? And of course, the worst circumstance would be death. There is a huge society cost to allowing our people and allowing our teachers and allowing our students to go into buildings that are contaminated. We hear now more focus on the flu. We've had over 1,200 kids die from the flu in the last 10 years. And you contrast that to the deaths at schools from shootings and the money that's being spent. And if you look at these numbers, we have 183 deaths from shooting versus 1,200 from the flu. 373 injuries versus tens, and if not hundreds of millions over that same period of people getting the flu and getting sick. We take significant steps to harden our buildings with vestibules and locks and security cameras against a visible killer. But we now know that we have the invisible ones, that we have to start shifting the dollars spent to harden the inside of our buildings to fight against these viruses and bacteria, as well as fight against the people that do the crazy things. $3 billion spent on hardening our schools. And yet, what are we doing to sanitize? Is it a bottle of Clorox? Is it a fogger every now and then? The kids are there every day. The students, the teachers are there every day. Your workers are at your buildings every day. So when we look at, on the left, the return on your investment by improving air quality produces, we have a high exposure and a low cost. Fix it. And an increase in performance. And yet the money that is being spent to harden is really a low risk of the event happening at a high cost and no real impact in performance. So it's really a matter of us shifting some of our focus and some of our resources. But beyond that, I think when we can show that in a hospital setting, in a school setting, in a work setting, improvement of performance, improvement of attendance generates dollars. In the hospital situations, if now you don't have an infected person, you have turnover in your room, you're not having those additional costs. In the school, students are coming. And here we just do a sample of the school with that 4.5 days on 1,000 students. That's roughly 25 students a day. At $50 a day, that's $27,000 per 1,000. And then the situation if you have the single parent. If one of those three have a single parent, and it's costing them $120 in lost wages, let alone the medical, it's another $21,000. And then teachers, missing days. And then I've been told that the cost of energy for a building of this size is anywhere from $500 to $7,500 a month. So if you take $6,000, oh, there's a mistake there. I'm sorry, it should be $10,000 a month. But there's a big savings there. So just with what we're already spending, or money lost by not having students at school, this system pays for itself in a relatively short period of time. So folks, we're dealing, as you all know, with a lot of unknown and a lot of uncertainty. The good news is that we have this report that really focuses in on best practices, a holistic practice, to bringing us back to some semblance of normalcy. So we can return to the productive world that we once had. And a system like this is unique, but it's proven, it's effective, it's continuous. And it will help solve this everyday problem that we're dealing with. I appreciate your time. I hope this was helpful, and I hope this was hopeful. If anybody is interested in getting a copy of this report, please email me. I'd be happy to give it to anybody. If you'd like to talk any further about this, set up a Zoom or set up a face-to-face meeting with you and your team, I'd love to do that, because we can bring normalcy back to our everyday living. I appreciate your time. I hope you have a great conference, and I look forward to hearing from you.